In this video, I'm going to show you the best way to generate leads. You see, most people reach out to anybody that they can find, or they spend hours crafting messages that get zero results. But that's only because they're missing this one step. You see, we've taken the high volume approach and booked 42 calls in 30 days for Relay partners. And we've also taken the low volume approach and booked 21 calls in 21 days for Bomodo, all because we focused on this one step first. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my entire process of finding people to reach out to in 2025. And I'll even spend my own money finding them, so you can see the whole process of finding email, LinkedIn, and phone for the people that you want to reach out to. But before you start getting their information, you need to find out how many people you can even reach out to, because this is the step that people miss. You see, when people don't know the number of prospects that they can contact, they end up using a strategy that doesn't really work for them. They either end up sending too many messages to people that require a more personalized approach, or spend too long personalizing messages to those that need a volume-based approach. So here's how to find the size of your market, no matter the industry. So the first thing you're going to want to do is hop into Apollo and add the filters for your ideal customer profile. So in this case, I just jumped in and I decided to pull a list of accountants. We're looking at specifically those within the US and Canada, 5 to 100 employee size. And then I added some industry filters and keywords. So normally, if you want to just keep it very back of napkin, just to, understand which strategy and direction you can go, you'd probably be okay with just including these industry filters. Again, this is just to give you a broad idea of how many people are in the market, just so you know which direction to go. So I included accounting, financial services, and management consulting. The one thing I did notice, however, was that there were a few fintech companies that got in there, so I just wanted to exclude those as well. So I went in and I added some keywords to include, and then I also added some keywords to exclude. As you can see here, more fintech related, and then these are more accounting related. Back in the day, coming up with these search criteria to actually get an accurate list in Apollo used to be a full-time job in and of itself. But now there are tools like this one here in ChatGPT that we've been using to come up with keywords and search criteria. So if you're ever kind of stuck on which direction to go, try checking out something like this, Apollo.io keywords, and just including the industry that you're going after. And you should be able to get a pretty good idea of the types of keywords, industries, and so on that you'll want to include to be able to get the best results. Now, once you have the company filter set, you're going to want to jump into the prospect data, because the idea of mapping your TAM is knowing how many people are there, not how many companies. So as you can see here, jumping over to the people tab, I added a series of job titles that were relevant to the offer that I was putting out. So the job title is also going to be kind of like a lever that you can push and pull depending on the size of your total addressable market. So if your total addressable market is smaller, you could probably add more job titles to try and get up and down to the decision makers. But if your total addressable market is large, I would focus a lot of the volume on those decision makers. So those, founder, co-founder, managing partner, so on and so forth. And then you can probably remove some of the managerial roles or those lower level roles. Once you've wrapped that up, you'll have a general idea of what your total addressable market looks like. So in this case, with all of the filters all in, we ended up with around 41,000 leads. And I would say this is pretty solid. Generally, if we're working with a client, we want to be in anywhere between like the 30 to 50,000 range. And that would kind of be our minimum. Anything more is obviously a bonus, and we love working with that. Anything smaller takes a very, very account-based strategy. So it gets a little trickier, and I'll show you what I mean in a sec. Now from here, we use a basic formula to understand how many people you should be reaching out to on a monthly basis. That way, if your TAM is small, you're not reaching out to all of them within 1 month and not having anybody to reach out to for the rest of your campaigns. And on the flip side, if your TAM is massive, you're able to, efficiently create an infrastructure on the back end that's capable of reaching out to as many of those leads as possible in a 3-month span. And the basic formula to figure this out is really, really simple. All you have to do is take the total addressable market that you have. So in this case, around 41,000, and you're going to want to divide that by 3 months. We do this because you can pretty well reach out to every single contact once every 3 months. By the time you hit that 90-day mark, the person that you reached out to on day 1 really isn't going to remember you reached out to them in the first place if they didn't respond to you. So if you do the math here, in our case, we'd probably want to build an outbound infrastructure that's capable of reaching around 14,000 prospects per month. And then if you run a 2-step sequence like we do, you double that. So you're capable of sending roughly 28,000 emails per month. And if you're under that 10,000 prospect per month range, you're probably going to want to take a bit of a different strategic approach. So like I'd mentioned earlier, either adding in more job titles to expand the TAM, or as I'll explain later, adding a few other touch points like LinkedIn and phone. Now, what some people will do here is immediately start pulling emails and phone numbers. But what you need to remember is that this was just to calculate how many people you could reach out to, not how many people you should reach out to. So here's what we're gonna do. So back on the company tab, what you're gonna wanna do is export all of the company data. So I would go in here, select all, 10,000 and apply. If your situation is like mine right now, where you have more than 10,000, I would just create a few segments within the data here. So whether that be employee size or something along those lines, just to create, 3 clean lists of 10,000, 10,000, and then 6,200 would be that in my case. So you just go up here, export as CSV, export records. So now what we're gonna do from here is export this as our master list and import it into a tool like Clay. And if you don't know what Clay is, it's a tool that allows you to pull data in from a bunch of different places and enrich it all in one spot. This way we can import this data and do whatever we want with it. Now, if you wanna generate leads without spending weeks learning tools like Clay and Apollo, you can book a call below. We'll map out your entire TAM, enrich it for prospect data, and build you an outbound infrastructure capable of reaching out to them on a consistent basis, which is exactly what we did for Bimoto, who booked 21 calls in 21 days. So if that's something you're interested in, you can book a call below. Now, this is the step that most people completely skip, and it's why they end up spending all of their money on just getting contact information. So what we're gonna do is pre-qualify these leads before spending money on the expensive data like email and phone numbers. So I won't spend too much time on this, but what I do wanna show you is the process that we did for qualifying these companies. So in this case, we brought in all of the information from Apollo after exporting that company data. So as you can see here, those 10,000 rows. And then we wanted to look for a few different things. So the first one was how many locations each firm had. The second was whether or not they were owned by private equity, and if so, which private equity firm owned them. And then third, whether or not they had case studies on their website, because that's something that matters a lot for our process. And we even added a bit of a little bonus here. So if they did have case studies, we created a personalized piece of copy that kind of allows us to reference those. And as you can see here, we basically ended up with 3 metrics. So number of locations, yes or no, whether or not they're private equity owned, and yes or no, whether or not they had case studies. We then used this to score each prospect on a scale of 0 to 3, 0 meaning they had none of the qualities, 3 meaning they had the most amount of qualities. And this will now allow us to determine how we want to prioritize the leads and which leads we want to spend more money on versus less. Obviously, if they have 3 of our qualifications, we're going to spend as much money as we can on them, getting all of the extra phone numbers, all of the extra emails, and so on, because it's obviously worth it for our ideal customer. And now we can actually find the important information of all of these potential people that we want to contact. You can also kind of go one of 2 different ways with this. If you want to take a more targeted approach, I would focus on just pulling the emails of those that were ranked, 2 or 3 on our lead scoring practice just a second there ago. If you want to take a broader approach, I would pull everybody, and then we can kind of look at it later and determine how we want to reach out to each one of those depending on their score. So I went and I inputted the domains here of those individuals from the Clay table that we had and added the job titles back into this. From here, we got a nice list of 6.5 thousand people, which is only really just a sample just for the sake of this video, as obviously it'd be a lot more if we scraped the entire TAM. But since we did a lot of the qualification on the company side, we really don't need to do much here. So once you have that set, grab the URL from Apollo, throw it into a tool like Appify, and you can scrape the data here. As you can see, we've ran it through the Apollo scraper on Appify, which is around $1.20 per 1,000 leads, and we got roughly 3,400 leads from that. Again, I stopped it for the sake of this video. It would have been a lot more, but truthfully, we don't need that much data right now. Now, before you use any of this data, you need to clean it. And by cleaning, I just mean preparing a lot of the data to be used in the email copy, to be loaded into the sequencer, and also verifying it just to ensure that the emails that you have are actually deliverable. So I'll show you really quickly here what we did in this case. We pulled all of the basic information that we got from Appify, including first name, last name, title, email, LinkedIn, organization. We cleaned the company name, cleaned the domain URL, and we did this for a few reasons. So there's a process in Clay called look up multiple rows in another table. So what this allows us to do is pull data from a previous table that we created and use it in the prospect level data. So in this case, we pulled things like the score from the previous table. That way we know how to treat each prospect. And then also the personalization that we created in the section when we were looking for their case studies. So what we're going to do with the score is essentially rank the prospects from 3 down to 0. Those that are 3 are going to receive a little bit of preferential treatment. So I'll show you here in a sec, essentially what we're going to do with those. But the biggest thing is going to be finding emails that Apollo perhaps didn't have, and then also enriching for phone number. When we know that these prospects are, best fit, we want to do as much as we can and add as many touch points as possible to potentially get in touch with them. So in this table, I'll show you what we did to get the emails of those that were missing data from Apollo. So you can see here, I filtered this table for the leads that had no email. So, when we created our Apollo list, we selected all prospects regardless of how much data was available. And we did this because we knew we could add the emails in Clay later. So in this case, you can see here, we scroll over and here's our email waterfall. So essentially what this is doing is looking for prospects that had no email and running it through a series of providers to be able to find that. And once you get to the end here, you can see we are able to find a good percentage of the emails that weren't in Apollo, probably close to 50%. And the last thing we did here was filter for prospects that were either a score of 2 or a score of 3, and we enriched for their mobile data. So you can see here, again, another waterfall where we're looking for each of the prospects' mobile phone numbers through the various data providers, depending on our preference. And then at the end here, you can see we are left with a series of phone numbers. In the end, there was only around 317 prospects who were ranked 2 or 3 out of the 3,400, but those ones are obviously going to, get some more effort from our SDR and our caller to ensure that we're actually able to get a hold of them. Now, the last thing you're going to want to do is verify all of your emails. So for us, we merged the emails from Apollo and the emails that we found in Clay into one spot and then ran them through Million Verifier to determine which ones were okay to send to, which ones were catch-all, and which ones were invalid. In this case, we're going to focus on those that are verified, the ones that are labeled okay, and we'll reach out to those first. And then again, if we have prospects that are ranked 2 or 3, aka they're, high value targets, we'll probably run these catch-all emails through a catch-all verifier, which is generally more expensive. Again, it just goes back to the idea of spending a little bit more money and giving a little bit of preferential treatment to the prospects that are ranked higher on our lead scoring. Now, while you're in Clay, you can add personalization to your columns as well. Now, if you're in a larger TAM, like I'd mentioned that 30,000 contacts plus, you can probably focus on just 1 or 2 tasteful personalizations, focusing more on the offer than the personalizations themselves. And if you're in a smaller TAM, below that 30,000 per month, I'd probably focus on making your email copy almost like one-to-one. If you're really, taking this multi-platform, going onto LinkedIn, taking it to phone and things like that, I'd be putting as much effort into these individuals as possible. So really doing everything you can to make that copy make an impact and stay relevant. In this case, our TAM was pretty large, so I just focused on one personalization. I also know our offer is really good and it's going to stand out to a lot of these people. So all we did was add a little bit of relevance just to make it look like we did our homework and leveraged a case study personalization like I showed you previously. So I'll show you here what we did. Essentially, for those prospects that had a case study available on their website, we created a line in the email that's going to say prospects like case study name. So calling out their case study essentially. And then down here, if you take a look, there is a situation where, we go to a website and they didn't have a case study. We essentially just called out their service. So it's like prospects looking for private 5G services or prospects looking for digital forensic services. Obviously those might not be the best examples, but prospects looking for marketing services, prospects looking for agricultural services, so on and so forth. Basically just trying to make the email seem relevant, even if they don't have case studies. Now, this is obviously a great approach to take when you're trying to find leads for any sort of outreach. But if you want to see the targeting strategy that we used to collect $100,000 from only sending 6,500 emails, you can watch this video and I'll see you there.